I was sipping my morning coffee on the porch, enjoying the quiet stillness that blanketed my land like a warm quilt, when something caught my eye and nearly made me choke. A long, winding line of vehicles, SUVs, campers, sedans, snaked its way down my private dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust as they rumbled closer. For a split second, I wondered if I had drifted off and was dreaming. But no, this was real. Far too real. One by one, people climbed out of their cars, stretching their limbs and yawning as if they'd just arrived at some five-star resort. Some of them started unloading tents, others hauled coolers, and a few were already scouting out prime spots to set up camp like they were claiming beachfront property. I just stood there, coffee mug still in hand, dumbfounded. What the hell was going on? Then I saw her. Melanie, queen of the HOA, clipboard in hand, her short platinum hair bobbing as she power-walked to the front of the group. She had that same smug expression she always wore, the one that screamed, "I'm in charge here." I took a slow, steadying breath and set my coffee down on the porch rail before I hurled it. Then, I stepped off the porch and headed toward the crowd. They were hammering stakes into the ground, unfolding chairs, even rolling out sleeping bags like this was Yosemite, not private property. My private property. Good morning, neighbor. Melanie chirped like we were lifelong friends. We're all so grateful for your generous donation to the HOA's annual camping retreat. I blinked. My what? Melanie gave a dismissive laugh and waved her hand through the air. Don't be silly. I told the HOA board we needed a community getaway, and your land was just perfect. So much space. So peaceful. It's not like you're using it for anything important. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Melanie, this is my land. Private property. None of these people have permission to be here. She gave me that same condescending smile that made my blood boil. Well, technically, the HOA agreed we should have a shared outdoor experience. And since you're part of the neighborhood, I'm not part of the HOA. I cut her off. My voice was sharp enough to cut steel. Her smile wavered for a fraction of a second before she plastered it back on like cheap wallpaper. Well, you should be, and everyone's already made arrangements. It's just one weekend. Honestly, you should be grateful to be included. Grateful? Was she serious? I looked around in disbelief. Someone was already building a fire pit. Kids were running wild, and some guy in cargo shorts was stringing a hammock between two of my old oak trees. This is trespassing, I said through gritted teeth. You need to tell everyone to leave. Now. Melanie scoffed and rolled her eyes. Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic. We're neighbors. It's just camping. Camping. On my land. With over 100 uninvited guests. Before she could spew another ridiculous excuse, there was a loud splat, followed by a shriek. A teenage girl had stepped right into a fresh pile of cow manure. You. Goose. There's poop everywhere, she screamed, hopping on one foot while her mom rushed over, horrified. Wait, the mom gasped. This isn't a cleaned-up campsite. Melanie hesitated. Well, technically no. No bathrooms? Someone else shouted, panic rising in their voice. A man in a Hawaiian shirt sniffed the air, his face twisting in disgust. What's that smell? I couldn't help it. I almost laughed. This land wasn't a manicured campground. It was raw, wild, and full of all the glorious hazards that nature had to offer. But Melanie, ever the dictator, refused to back down. She planted her hands on her hips. Look, we already planned this. People took time off work. Some brought RVs. It's too late to cancel. Not my problem, I replied flatly. Her face turned red, but she kept going. Well, technically, since the HOA. For the last time, Melanie. I snapped. The HOA has zero control over my land. You and everyone else here are trespassing. There was a murmur from the crowd. People were glancing around, shifting uncomfortably as reality began to sink in. Some were already starting to gather their things. But Melanie? She was still standing there like Napoleon at Waterloo. If you're going to be so selfish, she huffed, maybe we should put it to a vote. A vote? You think you can vote to take over my land? She lifted her chin defiantly. We live in a democracy, don't we? I ran a hand down my face. Fine, I said slowly. If you want to act like this is some kind of democracy, let me introduce you to my security detail. I pulled out my phone and made a quick call. It's time, I said simply before hanging up. Melanie frowned. Time for what? A deep, rumbling growl cut her off. From behind the barn, they appeared. 6 massive dogs. My real protectors. Trained, disciplined, and built like furry tanks. Their sleek black coats gleamed in the sun, their sharp eyes locked on the intruders with predatory focus. People froze. Someone dropped a bag of marshmallows. Are they friendly? A woman whispered, backing behind her husband. I gave a slow, deliberate smirk. Depends. Titan, the biggest of the pack, a Belgian Malinois with muscles like coiled steel, let out a thunderous bark that echoed across the field. Melanie's face drained of all color. You can't bring attack dogs into this, she stammered. I crossed my arms. Oh, but you can bring 100 strangers onto my land? Titan took a deliberate step forward. Shadow, his second-in-command, followed, ears pricked and eyes locked on Melanie, like she was a wounded rabbit. You wouldn't, Melanie stammered. They're trained not to attack unless provoked, I said casually. But who knows? Maybe someone will make a bad choice. The so-called community retreat turned into chaos. People scrambled to pack up, tripping over each other in their rush to leave. The man in cargo shorts abandoned his hammock altogether. Families practically sprinted to their minivans. Melanie, still clinging to the last shreds of her pride, climbed onto the hood of an SUV and shrieked, "I'm calling the police." I pulled out my own phone. Go ahead, I said. I already did. As if on cue, 2 squad cars rolled up the drive. Melanie gaped at me, like I just sprouted wings. The officers stepped out, surveying the scene. That's when Melanie realized she'd lost. She straightened her back and stormed toward the officers like she was filing a customer complaint. "Thank goodness you're here," she cried, flipping through her clipboard. This man released dangerous animals on innocent families. We were just trying to enjoy a peaceful event, and he threatened us. The taller officer, a grizzled man with a mustache that looked like it belonged on a war hero, gave her a long, unimpressed look. Then he turned to me. "Sir, you called about trespassers?" I nodded. "Yes, this is my land. No one here has my permission to be on it. As for the dogs," I added, "they're just making sure no one gets any ideas." The female officer, sharp-eyed and clipboard in hand, turned to Melanie. "Ma'am, do you have written permission to be here?" Melanie blinked, thrown off. I mean, the HOA agreed." "That's not what I asked," the officer said coolly. "Do you have written permission from the owner?" Melanie opened and closed her mouth like a fish. No one spoke up to help her. I walked to my truck, grabbed a folder from the glove compartment, and handed it to the officer. She flipped through it, then nodded. "Land's in your name. No HOA involvement. No shared community spaces." She turned back to Melanie. "You and everyone else here are trespassing." Melanie's face twisted. "But we planned this for months," she wailed. "People took time off. We printed schedules." "Not his problem," the officer said. "You need to leave." Melanie's eyes flashed. "You haven't seen the last of me." I stepped closer, my voice low. "Next time, my dogs won't just be standing around." She paled, but didn't say another word. She stormed her SUV and slammed the door, so hard it echoed. The officers gave everyone 10 minutes to leave or face citations. As the last cars pulled away, the mustached officer tipped his hat. "You handled that well." I smiled. "Thanks for the backup." The female officer gave a nod. "Let us know if there's a next time." "There will be," I said. "I'll be ready." And I was. Over the next few days, I installed more cameras, set up motion sensors, and tightened security. Sure enough, a letter from the county arrived soon after. Melanie had filed an official complaint, claiming environmental concerns and public safety violations. I laughed. At the county hearing, Melanie showed up dressed for war. I was in jeans and a flannel. She smirked like she'd already won. She hadn't. I handed over evidence, security footage, police reports, property documents. The county official barely contained his exasperation as he dismissed her complaint. As she stormed out, I sat back in my chair, calm as ever. Some people just don't know when to quit. That night, I sat on my porch. Titan rested his head on my lap. Shadow stretched out at my feet. The others lay nearby. This was my land, my sanctuary, and nothing, especially not Melanie and her HOA cronies, was ever going to change that.